Dr. Allan Cougle practiced general pediatrics for 7 years in New Orleans, and later in his career as a doctor, he was assistant professor of pediatric cardiology at Southern Illinois University School of Medicine. Dr. Cougle returns to the show to talk more about Raphe, a study of medicine in the Bible. Welcome back to the Harvest Show.
Glad to be here.
Okay, so the last time you were with us, we were talking about specific diseases in the Bible and, you know, how, I guess, how physicians in biblical times would, you know, go about healing people. Let's talk specifically about a few of those diseases. Like, we don't hear the mention of venereal disease in biblical times, but that was a huge problem, wasn't it?
It was, particularly with the neighboring tribes. The thing that was unique about the Jews is because of their public health laws, which were in the book of Deuteronomy and laid down by God, they were kept from a lot of that stuff because of their isolation. But then when they mixed with the other tribes, the neighboring tribes, then that became a problem. The interesting thing about treating, it was very simple. And in a sense, the rabbi was the health official or the health officer of those times. And there were physicians, but as we had said previously, they weren't always held in the highest regard. And when they treated someone, they used basic things like wine or oil to pour into wounds and sewing to stitch up injuries and so forth. But they stayed away from the Egyptian form of medicine and the Babylonian, which were prevalent in those days, by not getting into the filth therapy and that was used by the Egyptians and the Babylonians to discuss the demons, which they felt caused disease. You know, the Jews felt that God caused the disease, but the Babylonians and the Egyptians said the demons caused disease. So the filth therapy was common in those societies.
You mentioned in the book that the Jewish people seem to have a better idea of anatomy and the reality of anatomy than anybody else. Why was that?
Well, some of it was from the animal sacrifice. They would be familiar with the inside from animals. They weren't, of course, allowed to touch the dead unless it was, you know, a relative or whatever that they had to prepare for burial. They did not believe in human dissection. And also because within 24 hours the body had to be buried. So most of it was from animals.
When you talk about some of the other diseases or illnesses or problems like ear, nose, and throat problems, how did they address those issues, or did they?
Well, they had, of course, treatments that were more like old wives' tales that a lot of people would use, and then physicians would treat the things that didn't respond to that. They had simple things like dentistry with crowns and wooden and teeth, and they treated eye problems with salve and drops and compresses and things like that. But
what is it that you hope the reader of this book gets out of the book, other than, you know, a better understanding of what it was like back then?
Well, I think, as I've said to many people that have wanted to read the book, that the best thing to do is to read the last chapter first.
Why is that?
Because it's like we as Christians say we went to the back of the book, we looked at the back of the book, and we won. And we look at the book of Revelations, and we know it all comes out okay. And this David Crowder song, "Your Victory," you know, the death on the cross is my victory. And so, you know, it looks like that Jesus was defeated on the cross, but actually he won. And it all begins and starts with the cross. So I think that if you read the last chapter, and it's not for the lighthearted or the faint-hearted, because you get into detail as far as what the pain and the torture that Jesus suffered, not just on the cross, but leading up to the cross. you get into that detail, and then it concludes with almost a coroner's report of what caused the death. Was it the hemorrhagic shock, the cardiogenic shock, the loss of blood, the bruising but no bones broken, and finally, when it was all said and done, it wasn't these things that killed him, but Jesus said, "It is finished," and he gave up his spirit, and he let himself die. Because he could have, as a Son of God, endured forever, but it was finished. The work was finished.
I'm just wondering, you practiced medicine for some 40 years. Were you able to pray with your patients?
Oh,
Did
yeah.
they allow you to do so?
You have to ask, of course, particularly in today's society. Many patients came to me because they knew that I was a Christian, so they expected to be prayed for. And there were times when I could discern or see in the individual as they came that they wanted or needed prayer, and they were open to it. And you can sort of feel people out and just get an idea, of whether prayer would be appropriate or not, or praying directly for them. You can pray afterwards also, and of course that's just as powerful.
As you wrote this book, what is it that stuck out to you that you learned from your research?
The main thing was the fact that all throughout history, the Jews have been kept separate from the surrounding nations and tribes by the laws that they practice. The shehita, which is the Jewish method of sacrificing animals, so that minimal pain to the animal, but also maximum blood loss, so that they don't eat the blood, which is forbidden to them. And the various preparations and the that went into the isolation that the Jews did.
You said that Jewish people did not contract venereal diseases until they mingled with other tribes. And I think it speaks to a larger issue that God separates us, his people, to keep us from disease, from hurt, and from harm, not to be a mean God. Would you say that's correct?
Exactly. If we follow God's laws, then we gather for ourselves some protection. And that was when they started mingling with the other tribes. Of course, when the king started mingling with the princesses from other nations, then they brought in their idolatry. So it's not just the venereal disease, which is bad enough, but the idolatry, which in God's mind is even worse. So as long as they stayed pure and obeyed God's laws, they prospered.
We tend to think medicine has made progress in the 2,000 years since the Bible, but one thing that people keep coming back to in nutrition is the biblical diet. It's very popular today with a lot of people. Is that something, as a physician, you would perhaps recommend to a patient at times?
I do, and I think that the dietary laws are very specific in their recommendations, though sometimes we tend to go overboard. And I think the main thing to learn from the dietary laws is moderation, and also just to avoid certain things that are, such as, the prohibition against pork. That there was, the higher in cholesterol and fats and so forth. There are certain recommendations as far as animals that without the fish, without scales, without that were in the stagnant waters, that they would have more likely to have disease and so forth.
Not necessarily the locust and honey John the Baptist diet.
No, and coming from New Orleans, I eat shrimp and oysters and crawfish.
Hey, that's some good eating.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cougle. To connect with Dr. Cougle, check him out on Facebook at Rafi Medicine, or go to harvest-tv.com for a link to his new project. It's called Rafi, a study of medicine in the Bible. Harvest continues in just a moment.